always wanted to do it, even since I was a kid. Had the idea, one of those people who every time I look at something, it looks like it could be improved. There's something wrong with it, so I go through like, wow, how could this restaurant be better? And so I've always had that kind of idea. But I think the great thing about humans in general is we're always improving things. And so entrepreneurs and inventors, if they follow their curiosity and they follow their passions and they figure something out and then they figure out how to make it better and they're never satisfied. And you need to harness that. In my view, you need to harness that energy primarily on your customers instead of on your competitors. And so I sometimes see companies and even young, small startup companies, entrepreneurs go awry is they start to pay more attention to their competition than they do to their customers. And I think that in big mature industries, that might be a winning approach in some cases, kind of close following. Let other people be the pioneers and go down the blind alleys. There's many things that a new inventive company tries won't work. And so those mistakes and errors and failures do cost real money. And so maybe in a mature industry where growth rates are slow and change is very slow. But as you see in the world more and more, there aren't very many mature industries. Change is happening everywhere. We see it in the automobile industry with self-driving cars, but you could go right down the line of every industry and you would see it. It was super important for me, and I spent an unusual amount of time with my grandparents, and especially with my grandfather on the ranch. So he had a ranch in South Texas, and I would spend my summers there from age 4 to 16. And when I was 4, they were taking me for the summer to kind of give my parents a break, sort of because they were so young, and it was useful. I was a handful, I'm sure, and anyway, he created the illusion for me when I was 4 years old that I was helping him on the ranch, which of course could not have been true, but I believed it. And then by the time I was 16, of course, I was actually helping on the ranch. I can fix prolapsed cattle. We did all of our own veterinary work. Some of the cattle even survived. And we fixed windmills and laid, water pipelines and built fences and barns and fixed the bulldozer that you guys talked about. And so one of the things that's so interesting about that lifestyle and about my grandfather is he did everything himself. He didn't call a vet if one of the animals was sick. He figured out what to do himself. And resourceful, I think, is that you can't, if there's a problem, there's a solution. And of course, as you mature and get into the business world and anything you do on a team, you very quickly realize that it's not about just your own resourcefulness, it's about team resourcefulness and how does that work. And but that attitude of my grandfather's was but he was full of wisdom. John mentioned the story about the words my grandfather gave to me at one point of, it's harder to be kind than clever. A year after we got married, I went to her and said, I want to quit my job, move across the country, and start this internet bookstore. And Mackenzie, of course, like everybody that I explained this to, her first question was, what's the internet? Because nobody knew. This is 1994, and but even before she could say what's the internet, she said, "Great, let's go," because she wanted to support it, and she knew that I had always had this passion for invention and starting a company. And so, again, I think Mackenzie is an example of this, but. I was talking about with my mom and my dad, who's a Cuban immigrant, and he came to the U.S. when he was 16 and refugee camp in the Everglades. They're so loving and supportive that when you have loving and supportive people in your life, like Mackenzie, my parents, my grandfather, my grandmother, you end up being able to take risk, because I think it's one of those things. It doesn't. You kind of know somebody's got your back, and so it's just I don't even think you're thinking about it logically. It's an emotional thing. So it's probably true of all kinds of risks in life, not just starting a business. I mean, life is full of different risks. And I think that when you think about the things that you will regret when you're 80, they are almost always the things that you did not do. They are acts of omission. You're not, very rarely are you going to regret something that you did and it failed and didn't work or whatever. But the acts of omission, the thing, it's not, and again, I'm not just talking about business things. It's like, I loved that person and I never told them. And then, 50 years later, you'd be like, why didn't I tell her? Why didn't I go after it? So that's the kind of life regret that is very hard to be happy about when you're telling yourself in a private moment that story of your life. So I think anyway. I've won that lottery. I won that lottery of having so many people in my life who have given me that unconditional love. I remember early on, we only had 125 employees when Barnes & Noble, the big United States bookseller, opened their online website to compete against us, barnesandnoble.com. We'd had about a 2-year window. We opened in 95, they opened in 97. And at that time, all of the headlines, and the funniest were about how we were about to be destroyed by this much larger company. We had 125 employees and $60 million a year in annual sales, 60 million with an M. And and Barnes & Noble at the time had 30,000 employees and about $3 billion in sales. So they were giant, we were tiny, and we had limited resources. And the headlines were very negative about Amazon. And the one that's most memorable was just Amazon.toast. And so I called an all-hands meeting, which was not hard to do with just 125 people. We got in a room, and because it was so scary for all of us, this idea that now we finally had a big competitor, that literally everybody's parents were calling and saying, are you okay? It's usually the moms calling and asking their children, are you going to be okay? So, and I said, look, it's okay to be afraid, but don't be afraid of our competitors because they're never going to send us any money. Be afraid of our customers. And if we just stay focused on them and instead of obsessing over this big competitor that we just got, we'll be fine. And I really do believe that. I think that if you stay focused, then the more drama there is and everything else, no matter what the drama is, whatever the external distraction is, what your response to it should be to double down on the customer, satisfying them, not just satisfying them, delighting them.